Hey party people. In this video, I'm going to go over 3/4 figures. 3/4 figures are basically front view figures that are slightly angled away so that you do see some of the side. And I love these kinds of figures for both fashion illustration because it creates dynamic energy with the pose. And I also love them for fashion design because it makes you think about the clothing all around, and it reminds you to design on the round, and that not all design needs to be just like front and center like coffin garments. Now, I have a ton of figure drawing videos, and there's a lot to say about figure drawing. This video would be 3 hours long if I didn't cut it off at some point. I'm going to drop links to all my figure drawing videos in the description box below, but this video is really going to be focusing on things that are special about 3/4 figures, things you have to watch out for, and how to draw successful 3/4 figures. I can also do a video all about putting clothes on 3/4 figures, so let me know in the comments if you want that video, and please give this video a thumbs up if you want more figure drawing videos. Number one, 3/4 figures are really all about perspective. So you know how you look at those perspective drawings of buildings and the way they create those angles going back into space, it makes the building look 3D even though it's only a drawing. We're going to do that with figure drawing by making sure we're capturing the angles correctly. When you look at a 3/4 figure, look at their pectoral muscles or their breasts. The ones going further away from you will be smaller than the one closer to you because of perspective. So when you're analyzing a figure, drop in those angles: shoulder angle, over bust, apex bust, under bust, waist, high hip, low hip. Do you see how those angles are converging and going back in space, even on poses that are not super twisty, bendy, extreme? Okay, that's just basic perspective. And so you want to make sure that you're capturing those angles accurately to get a 3/4 pose that looks right. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a figure that's just smaller than the other without it looking 3D. One of the top things about drawing 3/4 figures is people want to know where to put the side seam. I want you to think about a body's torso a bit like a box. So first we have our center front line. So the whole front panel of our bodies, the middle of that is your center front line. Okay? And then we have the side panel of our box. That's our side. Your side seam should go in the middle of that side panel. Not the corner edge, but the middle of the side panel. Okay, that's your side seam. I like to lay out the pose with a soft color pencil and really capture my angles and proportions accurately before I go in and flesh out the figure. And I do have a video all about angles and proportions where I deep dive all of that. So go ahead and check that one out. When it comes to drawing arms, you need to pay attention to where the inside of the elbow is to position your arm muscle shapes correctly. On this man, the inside of his elbow is to the right-hand side. So that means we are seeing a side view of his arm. So we're going to see the bicep, which sits directly above the inside of his elbow. We're going to see his tricep, which is behind the bicep. And his deltoid muscle, his shoulder, is going to look a little bit like an acorn or a water balloon. Now, on the woman, the inside of her elbow is facing us, which means all we see is her bicep. The tricep is behind. And the deltoid, it looks a little bit more like, I don't know, a liver, a rounded triangle, something like that, okay? So pay attention to the angle of the pose of each individual body part and how to draw the basic muscle shapes. With legs, again, pay attention to where the kneecaps are. Okay, the kneecaps are going to give you the information of how the legs should be positioned accurately. Out of these 4 legs, 3 of them are 3/4 because of where the kneecaps are positioned off to one side, but not completely on one edge. You see that one side view leg? The kneecap is right on that edge, so you know you're looking at the side of the leg. If we were looking at a front view leg, the kneecap would be exactly in the middle of the knee. But these kneecaps are off to one side a little bit, which makes them 3/4 legs. So when you look at the anatomy and try to figure out how to draw the shapes, look at some anatomy books, then you know you're looking for a distinct 3/4 leg. Now let's elongate a 3/4 figure to fit your traditional 10 head fashion figure proportions. Drop a plumb line, mark out 10 head lengths that are all equal in size. I chose 1 1/16 inch for this example. 1 inch, 1 1/8 inch, those are all okay. I don't go much bigger or much smaller than that for fashion figures. The 2 mark, of course, the head takes up 1 whole head mark. And then the second mark should hit the top of a woman's breasts, like the top of a strapless dress or a tube top. Now, I made a mistake in this one and I ended up drawing the breast too high. I'm going to fix it later in the video. Don't worry, you'll see it in a minute. But the breast should be right under the 2 mark. And you might be wondering, hey, the breasts are at an angle. What do I do there? Just use an average. 3 should be the waist. And then 4 1/4 should be the bottom of the crotch. Knees should be at 6 and ankles should be at 9. Now, when a woman is not wearing shoes, like in this picture, the figure will end at about 9.5 heads. That's fine. But if you put this woman in a high heel or draw her foot as if it were to go into a high heel shoe, she'll be at a 10 head, basically. Okay, so that's your 10 head fashion figure proportions. And your elbow should be at around 3, unless the arm is off at an extreme angle. It should be that the elbow should be around the waist in length proportions, and the wrist should be right around where the crotch is. And you see on this pose, her arm is bent a little bit, so her wrist is a little bit higher than the crotch. And you see here we have 1 3/4 leg, judging from where her kneecap is, and her other leg is a front view leg, judging from where her kneecap is. And so you will see that her side seam will twist. It will be standard side seam placement at the top. As you approach the hip, it'll twist off to the side because she's angling her leg to the front. And so you would not see a side seam on this pant leg. So let's talk about legs and thigh muscles to draw more accurate 3/4 legs. There is a thigh muscle here called the vastus medialis. And no, you don't need to learn every anatomical term under the sun. It does help me as a teacher to call things the correct name. But you don't have to learn every single word like this. But this vastus medialis, it creates a curve here on the inside of the thigh just above the knee. Okay, our quadriceps are not symmetrical. So this curve will show up depending on how the leg is angled and what pose we're looking at. So when we look at this leg and we're looking at the more of the outside of the leg, you're going to see this curve, the vastus medialis curve, kind of come up just over the knee. But when you are drawing where you see more of the inside, the vastus medialis is facing us, so we're not really seeing the curve as it affects the outside shape, the silhouette of the leg. In this next figure, I want to talk about two things. One, elongating a figure for a fashion figure without going too 10 head exaggerated. We're going to do an 8.5, 9 head figure. And two, we're going to talk about drawing plus size figures. So again, draw a line, mark off 9 heads, and we're going to, again, place the breasts under the 2, the second head mark. Waist should be at 3, and bottom of the crotch will be 4.5. Okay, we're not making the torso so much smaller in comparison to the legs in this figure. We are kind of, elongating her a little bit, making her kind of like a tall model type. Now, these proportions can work for plus size and not plus size figures, the vertical proportions, so keep that in mind. Knees are at 6 again, and this time the ankles are at 8. So yes, the legs are elongated, but they're still within the realm of reality. Like 10 head figures, they don't really, they exist in nature. They're extremely, extremely rare 10 head figures, but 8.5, 9 head figures, they are closer to actual existing tall people proportions. Okay? A lot of models are 9 head proportions. When it comes to drawing plus size shapes, I hate to break it to you, but they're not that different. If you thought it was going to be some sort of ordeal, it's not. They're wider. There's more curves. But take this arm, for example. The inside of her elbow is right at the crook of her arm facing her body. So her bicep sits above it. Tricep curves curve high in the back. And so even though she has a layer of fat on top of her bicep and tricep, the curves are on top of these existing curves where the bicep is a long straight curve and the tricep is high on the arm. Same with the thighs. The basic shape is the same. The calves, the basic shape is the same, where the curves of the calves, and I'm always telling students, look, shins are not straight. They do have a curve, and they curve on a plus size figure as well. She's wearing these very Spanxy kind of leggings. She might have rolls. She might not. You could draw them if they were in the figure. That is up to you. Okay, so they're rounded. They're wider, they're bigger, but the shapes are very similar than not plus size figures. Let's draw a man. Let's draw an elongated fashion figure man. At this point, I think you can figure out how to just draw a not elongated male 3/4 figure. So let's talk about elongated proportions for male fashion figure. Okay, so waist is at 3 for dudes as well. And bottom of the crotch is at 4.5. Okay, a little bit longer than on women to accommodate his anatomy. The second head mark, the 2, sits pretty much square in the center of his pecs. Okay, so draw out those angles, proportion out his vertical proportions, sketch out the pose, and then knees are going to be at 6 or just below 6. I generally prefer just below 6 because on women we have the standard thigh and then a much more elongated, graceful calf. But on men, I like a little bit more evened out thigh to calf ratio. That V cut on very muscular men where it's the end of the obliques before you go into the hips? That cut should be lined up with the middle of a man's forearm, like a third of the way down to half the way down, kind of depending on the angle of the arm. On the guy on the left, that cut is right around where, like a third of the way down the forearm. And then on the right, it's more halfway down because of the angle. But that's how you kind of proportionately line up elbow, forearm, and that oblique cut. And then wrists are close to the crotch mark, just like women. I do have an Anatomy for Artists book that I do recommend. It's in my Amazon shop, and I'll have the title and everything, the information in the description box below. I did not show any pictures in this video because sometimes when I show those pictures, YouTube likes to flag me for monetization purposes and stuff. So I was like, let's not deal with that today. But there's a lot of references online. I have a Pinterest board called Figure Drawing Refs. And that's where I have all these model photos that I'm using in this video and much, much more. All kinds of figures, wearing underwear, wearing bathing suits, so you can really see the body, the pose, the muscles, all that good stuff. And that's it for 3/4 figures. Please give this video a thumbs up if you learned something new today. Share, subscribe. Drop me your questions in the comments section below. Please check the description box for further information. Let me know in the comments if you want a video all about how to draw clothes on 3/4 figures. And I'll see you in the next video.